Yeah, my guys, time to pull out the wallets because it's Silverwolf time, baby. I'm here making StaRail content because I started seeing, respectfully, the Silverwolf fan art, like this, and this, and this. Welcome to an in-depth guide and analysis of Silverwolf, and I wanted to make this video because I saw a lot of people like slandering and trash-talking her, especially about like when they look at her in a vacuum. Oh, she's so RNG. Like, chill, bruh. I got you. Today, we'll first do an analysis on her kit, and I'm really going to be focusing on her skill, allow changes, because to be honest, it's pretty complex, and so I'm just gonna break it down and then show you guys how we should use it and abuse it. And then I'll talk about how exactly we should play her and build her, and finish off by covering a few other things like comparisons to Pela and team building. My thoughts on mono quantum, mono teams, non-quantum, longevity, aka future proof. And for this video, I will talk a little bit more generally because all of my information is either from the official live stream or it's from all of the public open beta, closed beta footage, sorry. And my guys, I'm not about to get spanked by HoYoverse for talking about leaks. Okay? And yes, I prepared a slide deck for it, okay? Get over it. Move on. Alright, let's begin. Silverwolf. So as you all know, she is of the quantum element path of nihility, meaning she is on the path of either damage over time or debuffs. Silverwolf in particular is a debuffer and a sub DPS. And so what that means is that I'm going to be comparing her against similar archetype, which is Welt and Pela, which is not Kafka and Sampo. These two are the damage over time archetype of the nihility path. And so in terms of the base stats, at level 80, you can see that in comparison to Welt and Pela, she's looking like a glass cannon because she has more attack and more speed than both of them, and she has less defense, and she's in the middle of the pack for the HP. Now, this is what I love to see. The best defense is a good offense, but my Bronya kind of dies, and I kind of do the same thing. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Before we move on though, I did want to mention one more thing, and it's that between Welt and Pela, Silverwolf is probably closer to Pela because she applies more debuffs than she does damage. Okay, let's go next. We're going to talk about the other skills first before we get into her actual skill, because that one is like, it's going to take actually the majority of this video to explain. Her basic attack is the basic attack. However, what's nice about Silverwolf's basic attack is that her basic attack is not just a basic attack, but it's actually a basic attack that applies debuffs thanks to her talents. Basic attack. And so on attack, she implants one of 3 bugs that lasts X amount of turns. I think the last I saw was like 3 turns. It might get nerfed, it might get buffed 2 or 4. I'm pretty sure it's going to be 3. But these nuts are applied at random and they actually stack with each other, but not on top of each other. So an enemy can actually be debuffed with all 3, but not multiple of a specific one. So for example, you can't be debuffed twice with the attack down. This talent awaiting system response is actually incredibly good because it means that she is actually adding team value with her basic attack, which is also generating skill points. Now, on the other hand, we've got her ultimate at 110 energy user band. Now, this one is honestly like pretty giga cracked. It does a significant amount of damage. So the amount of damage it does is not actually comparable to a hunt unit, but it is closer to a hunt unit like Seele as opposed to like March's crappy ultimate. And look, I'm not throwing shade onto March's ultimate, but March was meant to be a tank character. It is clear that with the ratios of this user band ultimate, Silverwolf does have potential to be a sub DPS. However, the real juicer of this one is the single target percentage chance to decrease enemies defense by X percentage for a number of turns. I think it's 2 or 3 turns, I can't actually remember, and the defense down is quite significant. If I remember correctly, it's actually more than Pela's. Pela's is a 40% defense down AoE for all of the enemies. This one is only a single target. And so considering Silverwolf is a 5-star and combined with the fact that this is a single target skill, it is going to be better in terms of the percentage defense than Pela's 40%. At least I would hope so, right? HoYoverse? Alright, and so as for the other 2 skills, we've got Generate on Ascension 2, which on Weakness Break, so Silverwolf has to do the Weakness Break, I believe, she has a percentage chance to implement a random bug. Those bugs referring to the ones that we talked about before. And then lastly, we've got Force Quit Program, which is the technique, so the one that you use the attack to get into the battle. The TLDR of this one is that regardless of their weakness, so even if the enemy does not have a quantum weakness, she'll do damage to all of the enemies and reduce their toughness, aka their shield bar. However, what's interesting is that I noticed in the tutorial that the enemies would actually get their effect resistance reduced as well. And so with all of that out of the way, let's move on to her main skill, the big juicer, the one that's got everyone being like, oh man, it's so freaking RNG. Allow changes. So let's start off with the basics first. This is her E skill and it's got a pretty decent damage ratio. Again, it's actually quite close to your Seele's, to your JY's, and it is a single target attack. Now, on top of the damage, what it does is it adds a percentage chance to add one weakness type of a random ally to the target enemy. What this means is that if your team is composed of, let's say, Kafka and Silverwolf, which actually is true in the tutorial, you can go try it yourself, using this skill will actually implant either lightning or quantum onto the target enemy. Now here is where all of the different caveats begin because it's such a complex skill. The first thing is that Silverwolf herself, the quantum element, actually contributes to that percentage chance. And you can test this because if you use her by herself, then she will actually apply the quantum weakness provided the other conditions are met. And so the next thing is that this skill is based on the number of elements in the party and is not weighted by the number of characters. So even if you had 3 fire characters and just Silverwolf herself, there is only a 50% chance of hitting the fire weakness implant and a 50% chance of hitting the quantum element implant. I personally did not figure this one out. Credits to the madman who actually tested that and came with that result. Now, this weakness implant will only work if the weakness does not already exist on the target. So, for example, Cocolia. Cocolia is weak to fire, lightning, and quantum. And so what that means is that if I took in my team that looks like this, fire, lightning, and quantum, let's pretend that Bronya is instead the Silverwolf, I would actually be implanting nothing every time I used Silverwolf's attack because I have 3 elements, fire, lightning, and quantum, 33% chance for each one to be implanted. However, she is already weak to all 3 of them, and so none of them are going to get implanted. If we kept following this logic, this game's logic, and for example, instead, let's say Bronya is actually my Dunhang, my Giga Chad level 5 Dunhang, and let's pretend that my Seele is actually a Silverwolf. Now what that means is that Dunhang is the only one who does not have the weakness on the Cocolia, and so every time my Giga Chad Silverwolf implants, she would always hit the wind weakness. And so what this means is that as long as you plan out your teams in advance, you're always going to be fine. Because let's be real, the only endgame really is your Memory of Chaos. Realistically, you're going to be autoing everything else. But for Memory of Chaos, at the very least, we have all of the bosses as well as the different mobs and all of their weaknesses laid out. So we can actually plan some optimal team allocations. And you know what? Let's take this exact example. We are on phase 2 of Memory of Chaos. I have these characters and I have to hit these 2 enemies. This one is weak to fire, ice, and imaginary, and this one is weak to ice, lightning, and imaginary. Now, as you can tell, I don't actually have a main DPS for any of those elements, unfortunately. And so my only 2 main DPSs are my Seele and my Clara. So that means that Seele is going into one and Clara is going to the other. I picked Seele for the first one because there are a couple of quantum weak enemies, although they aren't the boss. And then after that, I can tank fire for the team 1. Then Bronya can come in and I can finish it with either Baizu or Natasha. I'm going to put Natasha in because this team is already giga stacked. And so for team 2, what it's looking like is Baizu and March. And if I had the Silverwolf here, she can actually be the enabler that allows my Clara to start breaking down this guy's shield. Because again, Implant will never apply lightning or ice, which is the other 2 characters, but it will have a 50% chance of getting quantum instead of physical, which is kind of okay considering, again, she is a sub DPS. The next thing is that if you are successful in the implant, then you will also reduce the damage resistance of the weakness type by 20%. So in that previous example, if we actually succeeded in implanting the physical or the quantum, then the enemy would either get physical minus 20% resist or quantum minus 20% resist. And that resist reduction will last 2 turns up to 3, I believe, with the Ascension 4. However, there is something a little bit more interesting about this, a little bit more metagamey that we need to talk about. And it's that the majority of enemies actually have an innate resist of 20% to all elements, unless they have innate weaknesses or resistances. So for example, the Cocolia before was weak to fire, and so Cocolia's fire resist would not be at 20%, it would be at probably 0. And so what that means is that if the enemy does not have the weakness listed, then they can either have that resistance, the one that we're about to implant, going from 40 down to 20% if they are resistant to it, or from 20, which is neutral, down to 0%. Now, there are some exceptions, and the exceptions to this is actually the bosses, where they have unnaturally high resistances in some aspects. So for example, this is Cocolia, and as you can tell, she is an ice queen. And so because she is an ice queen, she has 60% ice resist. And so in scenarios like this, it really wouldn't be smart to try to implant ice just to take it down from 60% down to 40%, because at the end of the day, you're still going to be doing mediocre damage as opposed to bringing in your Dunhang, implanting, and it's going to go from 40 down to 20, or even maybe taking like a Giga Chad Welt, a DPS Welt, because you'd be able to take down that resistance from 20 down to 0. And so the moral of the story, my guys, is that if it looks like an element, it probably has resistant to that element. She looks like an ice queen, she's probably resistant to ice. If bro looks like he's made out of ice and he's literally got ice in his name and he's got an ice resistance next to the resistance, then he's probably resistant to ice, and you probably should not be using your ice units on this guy. And so with that out of the way, let's move on to the last point of the slideshow, which is that you can only have one active weakness implant at a time. Now what this means is that if you implant into one enemy and then you try to implant into another one, the old one will actually expire and the new one will persist. That means that there are actually two ways to play Silverwolf. Either you spam her E skill, which is very, very skill point inefficient, and you do this across all of the mobs, or you could just implant onto the boss and keep whacking the boss, tunnel vision on the boss only. I personally prefer option number 2 because it is significantly more skill point efficient. However, the other thing is that especially in MOC, literally the only content that really matters, the majority of the incoming damage is usually loaded on the boss. Like these little peons, like what the frick are they gonna do? Nothing. That's the answer. They're literally gonna do nothing. So the best case scenario is to just wail away and break the boss as much as possible. All right, my guys, that is gonna bring us to the end of the skilling section. Let's move on to how exactly we should build and play her. This video never ends, brothers. Okay, let's talk about building her first. Two ways really, debuff or DPS. I know a lot of you have probably been watching this video and like, oh man, but he said the ratios are pretty good. All right, they're okay, but in a vacuum, they're okay. Because whilst the damage ratios are only slightly worse than Hunt and Erudition and even Destruction Path characters, it's the talents, the traits, and the synergies, and even the LCs actually that make the difference. So for example, you freaking get like free crit rate or crit damage for just being a Hunt character on those 5-star light cones. And don't get me wrong, bros, it is certainly viable, but it is not optimal. And if you do want to go down this path, I would highly recommend crit rate into crit damage, and then speed, and then EHR, which is effect hit rate, and then attack percentage. And as usual, 1 crit rate to 2 crit damage ratio. However, on the other hand, I would really recommend, and I'll be going this myself, going down the debuffer path, which is effect hit rate over speed over attack. So ignore crit rate, ignore crit damage. And the reason is because crit rate and crit damage, they're unfortunately just too costly in terms of investment to make work. And so your effect hit rate is primarily to land more debuffs, and speed is for faster rotations. Now, I know that it looks like you're getting more than 100% effect hit rate, and yes, we do want that because enemies also have effect resistance. And lastly, I do say attack because it does make most sense for her to take advantage of those pretty decent damage ratios. But honestly, you could throw on some defense or HP or something if she is dying a lot. And so with all of that in mind, her gear should therefore be on her body, effect hit rate, boots, speed, her planar sphere, quantum damage percentage, because the other ones are kind of mid. And for her link rope, you want the energy regen rate. And the reason is because her massive defense debuff is locked behind her ultimate. And so you want to cycle the ultimate as much as possible. And to do that, we need more energy regen rate. In terms of the set effects, the best in slot doesn't exist yet, so just run the Musketeers or the Clown one, like that purple, white, the other really common one. At this point in the game, it's just more important to get the main stats, so these ones over here. We can do all of the min-maxing a little bit later. However, in terms of like the secondary equips, the 2-piece set effect, the Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise is actually really good because it increases the wearer's effect hit rate. And then on top of that, you also get attack that is scaling off of that effect hit rate up to a maximum of 25%. And so again, in terms of how to play, I believe we have covered it quite extensively, but basic attack for the bug application, weakness application when required, so you don't have to spend overly much skill points. And lastly, just think about your team comps when you go into the memory of chaos. Okay guys, we're almost there, just stay with me, okay? Final notes. Her most logical pairing is Seele, and the reason is really simple. Implant Quantum, attack Quantum. It honestly makes a lot of sense. However, what about a full mono Quantum team? In my opinion, it will be fun to pull off. However, when exactly you can pull it off and get value from it is when we do get 4 characters that are quantum, of which at least one is abundance or preservation, ideally both. But to be honest, I think it's going to be a very long time before we actually get to that state, so it's more of like a fun long-term goal rather than I'm going to meta chase now to clear as fast as possible. I personally think that it's pretty obvious that the game wasn't really designed for mono teams because they put like these 3 to 4 to 2 weaknesses on every single monster. And so yeah, I would say that it sounds really fun, but I really wouldn't make it your whole identity. The next thing is comparing Silverwolf versus Pela. This is a pretty big one because Pela on paper is actually really good, and actually in practice as well, because she has 2 sources of AoE defense down, in which one of them is her technique, so you can only use it once, but the other one is her ultimate, in which you get an AoE 42% defense down for 2 turns. That's honestly really freaking strong. On top of that, she's got a talent that restores energy on debuff attack. And look, yeah, she is lower investment. It's easier to hit the Eidolons. She's very skill point efficient. And that freaking defense down is AoE compared to Silverwolf's single target. It honestly makes a lot of sense to just run the Pela. Because if you're thinking from a generalist point of view, I just want to unga bunga defense down big damage, we put in Pela. However, what Silverwolf does do is open opportunities. Because going back to this Memory of Chaos example, you already saw, like, I don't have a fully fleshed out roster. I only have 2 main DPSs right now, and both of them are going to be a lot of suffering. And so because I don't have the elemental coverage, with a little bit of planning and a little bit of luck, I could actually bypass some of these requirements. For example, I could actually use the Clara on Team 2 to clear this. Those opportunities, my guys, is what makes Silverwolf cracked. The defense down is really nice, but that nobody else can give. And so the last point would be about her staying power, aka future-proof, long-term relevance, whatever. I think that she is going to remain very relevant, and the reason is because of the mono teams. Let's take an example. It's 6 months down, and there are a lot more characters in the game, such as a fire healer and an ice DPS. You still don't have a Seele because she still has not rerun yet, and you're running with something like this. Let's take the fire team, for example. And so what we're trying to do here is to run a triple fire team with the Silverwolf. And if, for example, we were in this memory, and look, this boss has quantum, but is not weak to fire. So what that means is that every time we implant onto this guy with a triple fire team and a quantum weakness already there, we would be 100% of the time hitting fire. However, let's take a less optimal scenario like this one over here. It is not weak to either quantum nor fire. So what that means is that we may hit weakness implant onto quantum first because Silverwolf exists. But then if you actually implant again, it should, in theory, turn into fire implant, and then all of your fire units just go wailing on them. So again, that is another opportunity that Silverwolf actually creates that no other character can do. And so guys, that is it. I hope that was useful. She personally is my favorite character. I definitely will be rolling for her, but enough about me. Let's talk about you. Let me know if you enjoyed the video or found it helpful down in the comments below. Or call me out if I got something wrong or if there is a little bit more information that would help all of us. Also, let me know if you want to see a lore chart guide as well. However, I would really appreciate a like, subscribe, notification bell on. But otherwise, my guys, as your girl Silverwolf once said, all good things must come to an end. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.